Two women in the third row of the bleachers watched the old man get stopped at the checkpoint, and neither one said anything for a moment, because there was nothing yet to say. A folded paper never left his hands, and he had asked, only once, to see the land navigation course before he would take his seat, though he told the young corporal at the gate he only wanted to stretch his legs. 90 seconds was all the flyover window allowed, a single transport crossing a single stretch of sky, on a schedule the Air Force would not move for a graduating platoon or anyone in it. One folded overlay rode inside a case older than the sergeant, now holding up the line, and 162 recruits, standing in formation with their families watching, were about to find out how easily a ceremony can be lost by the people meant to guard it. If you have ever watched someone dismiss the quietest person in the room and wondered what they were about to lose, you already know how this field is about to go silent. "That's her grandfather," the first woman said, leaning toward her neighbor without taking her eyes off the checkpoint. "Callie's, the one she wouldn't stop talking about at the family briefing." "He's not on the list then," the second woman said, not unkindly, just reading the shape of what she was watching. "They're particular about the list." The old man did not argue with the corporal. He stood with a stillness that made the argument look unnecessary, the folded case held against his hip the way another man might hold a hat he was waiting to be told to remove. He came dressed as though the suit had been waiting in a closet for this exact morning, and no other. Cut 30 years out of fashion, a jacket built for shoulders that had since narrowed, but pressed so sharply along every seam that it looked less like something old than something preserved. A plain ball cap sat low on his head, the kind sold at a hardware counter, not a surplus store. He wore it the way a man wears a thing he intends to take off soon, and for a reason. When he turned to look toward the formation field, he did not turn his neck. He turned his whole body, unhurried, a slow rotation like a gate swinging on an oiled hinge, so that by the time his eyes found what he was looking for, the look itself seemed already decided. He did this now, toward the flagged course beyond the reviewing stand, and something in the angle of his attention made the ground look, briefly, like something worth studying, rather than something to be walked across. The case in his hands was leather gone the color of a saddle left out through a dozen winters, its flap stamped with a crest gone soft at the edges, cut, though no one watching could have known it, by his own hand in 1967, with a die borrowed for one afternoon and never properly returned. He lifted the flap now, checked the stamp against the climbing sun the way another man might check a watch, tilting it until the light caught the crest just so, then closed it again before anyone standing near him could see what was inside. 50 yards off, in a folding chair reserved for family already seated, a young private in dress uniform pressed a radio to her mouth and kept her voice low. "He's here," Callie Gant said. "He's at the gate. Somebody tell them he's supposed to be here before this turns into a whole thing." Nobody told them in time. Staff Sergeant Maddox Devereaux crossed toward the checkpoint with the particular briskness of a man who had rehearsed being watched, his laminated run sheet clipped to his belt, 2 fingers tapping it twice before he spoke, a habit half his platoon had started doing behind his back without him noticing. "Sir, I need you to step back from the formation line," he said, pitched to Carey. Because there were families in the bleachers, and a staff sergeant conducting business in front of families conducts it for them as much as for the man in front of him. This is reserved seating for approved family members. Your name isn't on my roster." "I understand," the old man said, nothing more. "Then you'll understand why I can't let you stand here," Devereaux said, and there was a small laugh from somewhere behind him, quickly swallowed because the row of recruits at parade rest were not supposed to laugh at anything and had, for half a second, forgotten themselves. "Policy states unlisted civilians are directed to general seating, no exceptions during honors positioning. That's word for word, sir. I don't write it, I just carry it." Callie was on her feet before she'd decided to be, her voice cutting thin across the distance. "Sergeant, that's my grandfather. I put him on the—" "Recruit Gant, you are not on official visitor liaison duty," Devereaux said, without turning fully toward her, which somehow landed harder than if he had. "Sit down." She sat, because that was the order, and because arguing further in front of 100 watching families was its own kind of losing. The old man only nodded once, As if this too had been expected, tucked the case tighter against his ribs, and let himself be walked toward general seating without another word. His stride slow and even, the kind of walk that refuses to be rushed by a man half his age escorting him off a field he had not asked to be on in the first place. He took a folding chair near the fence line, apart from the reserved rows, apart from Callie, and set the case flat across his knees. From there, the whole training field opened out in front of him like a map already half read. The flagged land navigation course looping out past the reviewing stand, 6 range flags snapping at varying angles along the tree line, a lone water tower throwing its shadow east-southeast across scrubbed grass, and somewhere out past the second flag, a recruit runner jogging a line that did not match the bearing painted on the ground. He watched the flags first. Not the formation, not the bleachers, not Devereaux moving back toward his post with the satisfied gait of a man who has enforced something correctly. The flags told him what the wind was doing, and the wind was doing something the runner clearly hadn't accounted for, because her line kept drifting a few degrees wide of the marked course with every stride, correcting late, correcting wrong. A young private assigned to family area support, no older than Callie, noticed him noticing and leaned down out of curiosity more than duty. "You a vet, sir? You keep looking at the course like you're grading it." "Ground doesn't lie the way people do," Newell said, and went back to watching the runner, and did not explain further because there was nothing in the sentence that needed explaining twice. The runner was young, sprinting a message pouch toward the reviewing stand with the particular urgency of someone who knows exactly what a missed window costs and does not yet know how to fix being lost. Her marked course, GPS flagged and freshly painted that morning, ran her along a fence line whose true bearing had drifted at least 4 degrees since whoever last surveyed it, a fact no device on her belt was built to notice, and every blade of wind-bent grass around her was announcing plainly. She corrected against her compass instead of the ground, which meant she corrected wrong, and the gap between her and the review stand kept opening instead of closing, while a transport somewhere over the horizon held to a flight plan that would not wait for her to learn better. 90 seconds. The number moved through the staff line like a current, murmured, then repeated, then shouted, because someone in the announcer's booth had just confirmed the honors flight was inbound on schedule, and the timing confirmation that was supposed to already be in the review stand's hands was instead 300 yards away and getting farther by the second. Newell stood. It was not a fast motion, and it did not need to be. He set the case on the chair behind him, lifted the flap, and drew out the single folded overlay he had carried the whole morning without unfolding once, a route he had drawn on paper thinner than the one it had been copied from, older than the paper itself deserved to survive being. He held it a moment against the light, oriented it once toward the water tower's shadow, then began walking, not toward the runner, but toward the fence line's true angle, cutting a path no course marker on that field currently showed. "Cut left off the fence at the bent post," he called. Not loudly, but pitched to carry the way a man's voice carries when it has spent 40 years being obeyed in wind. "Follow the tower's shadow, not your compass. Compass has been reading 4 degrees long since somebody moved that fence." The runner hesitated exactly 1 stride, the way anyone hesitates when an unfamiliar old man in a pressed suit gives her an order that contradicts a device strapped to her wrist. Then something in the certainty of it, or the flags, or the simple fact that her own line clearly wasn't working, turned her feet before her mind had finished deciding, and she cut left at the bent post exactly as told. She crossed under the tower's long shadow. She adjusted twice more, each time on Newell's low, unhurried call, corrections that shaved yards off her line where her compass had been adding them. She reached the review stand with 11 seconds left on a window that a moment before had looked unrecoverable, breathless, pouch in hand, staring back across the field at the man who had just walked her home by eye alone while every marked flag on the official course sat exactly where it had been painted, uselessly correct and 4 degrees wrong. The recruits in formation broke discipline for half a second, a ripple of turned heads and 1 low whistle quickly stifled. Families in the bleachers who had no idea what they'd just watched still understood, from the stillness of the staff around them, that something had. Devereaux did not clap. He did not smile. He stood very still with his run sheet still clipped to his belt and said, to no one and everyone. That's not how the course is marked. No, Newell agreed, folding the overlay back along its old creases. Patient as a man closing a Bible after a reading he already knew by heart. It's how the ground is. He should have let it end there. Instead, Devereaux crossed toward him fast, the laminated sheet snapping against his belt as he moved. His voice pitched again for an audience, though the audience had gone quieter than he seemed to register. That method's in the manual, sir. Chapter 4, Terrain Association over Instrument Reliance. It's got an originator's name on the cover. I teach it every cycle. I don't know what you think you just did, but it isn't new, and it isn't yours. Didn't say it was, Newell said. Then we're square, Devereaux said, though nothing about his posture suggested he believed it, and he turned to the runner instead, because a moving target was easier to manage than a still one. You went off the marked course. I don't care whose grandfather told you to. That's a deviation, and I'm required to log it. Sergeant, Callie said, on her feet again, radio still in hand. She made the window because of him. She made the window by disobeying a documented course, Devereaux said, and tapped the run sheet twice, an old comfort failing to do its old work. I have to report the deviation regardless of outcome. That's policy. I don't get to pick which parts I like. Somewhere behind the reviewing stand, a staff radio crackled with the flat, unhelpful voice of dispatch. Command Sergeant Major Rutherford was still 40 minutes out, held at the main gate by a supply convoy that had picked the worst possible morning to run behind schedule, and there was no one else on post with rank enough to overrule a drill sergeant standing on procedure in front of 100 watching families. The transport crossing the horizon did not care about any of it. It held its course, its 90 seconds narrowing toward whatever came next, indifferent to a manual, a policy, or a name on a cover that had never belonged to the man who wrote the method underneath it. Callie's thumb found the radio's send key before her better judgment caught up to her hand. This is Recruit Gant, family area. I need someone in the booth to know that's Newell Gant out there, the one who just fixed the runner's line. Somebody needs to. And her voice, thin with panic, carried farther over that channel than she meant it to, all the way to an announcer's booth that had no idea what to do with the name beyond repeating it once into an open mic before a technician cut the feed. Devereaux barely heard it. He had already pulled his manual from beneath the clipboard-thin run sheet, flipping to Chapter 4 out of some instinct to arm himself with the printed page, and there, beside the terrain diagram, was the same water tower method Newell had just walked cold across open ground, credited on the cover to a major who had gone on, decades ago, to a long and decorated career built partly, it turned out, on paperwork that was never entirely his. Devereaux's eyes moved from the diagram to the fading crest stamped into the case now resting in Newell's hands, and something in his certainty caught like a hinge with no oil left in it. This crest, he said slowly. I've seen it. Smaller, printed in the corner of the cover plate. I always figured it was just decoration. It's a unit mark, Newell said. 1967. Man who commanded us borrowed the die to check some notes I'd drawn up. Said he'd get them copied and send them back. Never did. I didn't chase it. Wasn't why I drew them. Devereaux said nothing for a moment that stretched longer than the 90 seconds now bleeding away on the horizon. Then the radio at his hip crackled again, this time with a voice that carried authority the way Newell's had carried certainty, unhurried and absolute. This is Command Sergeant Major Rutherford. Reachable. Do you copy? The voice said, thin with distance and wind off a tarmac somewhere miles out. I am told a Gant is on that field. Confirm. Confirmed, Sergeant Major, the booth answered, scrambling. Then hold the ceremony, Rutherford said. Hold it 90 seconds if you have to hold it on your own authority, and if anyone asks you why, tell them I said so, and I'll explain it standing in front of them if I have to. Is his case with him? The booth looked to Devereaux, who looked for the first time all morning like a man checking not a policy but his own memory. It's with him, Sergeant Major, the technician finally answered. Then hold it, Rutherford said again, and the line went to static, and somewhere overhead, exactly on schedule, the transport began its final approach into a window the field had, against every printed procedure on Devereaux's belt, just barely kept open. The transport passed low and clean at the 90-second mark, engines folding the whole field into a single held breath, and when it was gone, the recruits broke into applause, meant for the flyover but landing. Everyone could feel it, somewhere else as well. Devereaux stood apart from the formation with the manual still open in his hand, and for a long moment he didn't move to close it. Then he did the thing none of his own recruits would have predicted from him that morning. He recited it, unprompted, word for word, the exact overlay procedure printed under the wrong name in Chapter 4. Cite the fixed feature first, never the moving one. Let shadow give you bearing when instruments lie. Correct against the ground, because the ground was surveyed by God, and the compass was surveyed by a contractor. He said it the same way his own drill sergeant instructor had taught it to him, years before, in words Devereaux had assumed belonged to a textbook and not to a living man 40 feet away, holding the case that had actually produced them. "You taught this to Master Sergeant Kellen," Devereaux said. "Who taught it to me? I didn't know that. I've been teaching your method for 4 years and crediting a man who never wrote a page of it." "Wasn't looking to be credited," Newell said. "Was looking to get boys home who couldn't read a compass in the wind. That's the whole reason it exists." Devereaux reached to his belt and unclipped the laminated run sheet, the one he had tapped twice before every announcement that morning, and instead of holding it up again, he simply set it down on the empty chair beside him, as if the paper had finally run out of things worth reciting. "Sir," he said, and the word came without performance in it now, without an audience to pitch it toward. "What do you want done? The reprint's due out next month. I can get your name on the cover before it goes to press. I can make sure it says Gant everywhere that book currently says the wrong thing." "Don't put my name on it either," Newell said. "Man who took credit didn't ask permission to put his name there. I'm not looking to do the same thing back to him just because I'm the one who's owed it. Leave the page blank if you have to. Let the method stand on its own. That's all it ever needed to do." Devereaux looked like he wanted to argue the mercy of it, and didn't. "Then let me ask you one thing that isn't in any manual," he said instead. "How do you read ground like that? Not the trick of it, the way you actually see it." "You stop asking the compass what it thinks," Newell said, "and you start asking the ground what it's already told you. It answers before you finish the question. Most men just aren't quiet enough to hear it landing." Devereaux didn't answer that with words. He came to attention, not because anyone had ordered it, and held the position a beat longer than protocol required, and Newell, watching him with the same unhurried, whole-body turn he'd used all morning, gave him the smallest nod a man can give, and still call it an answer. Months later, the training center's land navigation manual went to its scheduled reprint, and Chapter 4 carried a new line in its margin, plain and unadorned. Method drawn from the Gant overlay, 1967, credited on the record. No rank followed the name, no photograph accompanied it. It sat there the way the man himself had sat in a folding chair at the edge of a field he hadn't been listed to attend, quietly correct, asking nothing further of anyone. The graduation field emptied out by evening, buses loaded, families gone, the flags along the course finally still. Newell stayed in his folding chair near the fence line as the light dropped low and gold across the grass, the case closed flat on his knees, its stamped crest facing up as though still checking itself against a sun that had already gone soft behind the tree line. He had not come to be seen. He had come because she asked him to, and that had always been reason enough. Callie knelt in front of him in her dress uniform, the parade ground dust already ghosting pale across her boots, and worked the laces of his shoe loose and retied them properly, because his knee would not let him bend to do it himself, and never once, all day, had he mentioned that it wouldn't. "That folded paper," she said, not looking up from the knot. "The one you carried all morning and never showed anyone but that runner. What route is it?" "Same route I walked the day your father was born," Newell said. "Half a world from here. Didn't have a phone. Didn't have a way to know if he'd made it safe into the world before I made it back to camp. Just had this to keep me pointed the right direction till I found out." She finished the lace and rested her hand a moment on his knee instead of standing right away. Some corrections take 50 years to reach the page, and it only takes one honest man refusing to let a lie outlive him to put them right, and the field held that thought in its stillness the way it had held the wind all day, until Newell finally reached down, unhurried, and rested his hand flat over hers, and neither of them said anything more, because the ground, as always, had already said it for them.